Okay, so the purpose of the record review document is it actually provides the legal foundation for us with our due process folders. It promotes consistent standards for districts to utilize when conducting review of student due process folders. It also develops a professional learning tool for compliance monitoring. It provides data collection guidance to accurately collect required information for the state performance plan, as well as the annual performance plan. And it established a consistent tool for use during the division of IDEA monitoring and results consolidated monitoring process. So they use this tool when they come to your district to do your audits on your records. Now, this one says administrative directions for review of records for indicator 11, 12, and 13. So this goes out to those people, the directors that have to do this. 10% of the district special education population related to each indicator must be selected for the review to be valid. And for those districts that have 10 students or less, then you must use all 10 of those folders. Districts are not required to review more than 50 student records. We do have some districts that are really, really big, but we only have to do 50 student records. Indicator 11 requires 10% of students evaluated during the current year, and this includes those students that were determined eligible and those that were not determined eligible for special education services. Again, we have to do this randomly, so you can either visit the random.org for it to go ahead and populate your students. You can print a copy of your special ed students and choose every, and this is just there, you know, every 3rd, 5th, or 10th student. Print a copy of the special ed caseload, teacher's caseload, and choose randomly. And then you can also do the special ed teacher's caseload for every school and choose randomly. You can also do each disability category for each school or the district and choose randomly. So there's several ways that you can go about doing this randomly. It's just however you choose to do it. Corrections of non-compliance. Examples of violations that may be corrected, you know, prior to you submitting them to KDE are a failure to document post-secondary goals in the IEP, failure to document transition services in the IEP, failure to invite outside agencies to the ARC meeting to discuss the transition, failure to document the student's multi-year course of study, failure to link the annual goals to related post-secondary goals, and failure to document evidence of transition assessment. So violations of IDEA that are reported as non-compliance. All right, violations identified that cannot be corrected in individual student records due to the nature of the violation. So one thing about the transition part is that before we send those, if requested from KDE, the records, we can look at that, and if it needs corrections, then we can go ahead and do the corrections and then send them once they're corrected. So here are some that cannot be corrected. So not obtaining parent consent prior to inviting the outside agency to the ARC meeting, not inviting the student to the ARC meeting, missing the timeline for updating post-secondary goals annually, not having transition requirements in the IEP by the student's 16th birthday, missing the timeline for evaluation, the initial evaluations, missing the timeline for annual review, and missing the timeline for an IEP being in place by the 3rd birthday for children transitioning from first steps to preschool. So then you come off and you have your demographic data. On this, you need to make sure that you complete it fully, not just put the reviewer name on it. Sometimes the districts have teachers to go ahead and do these on their own. But go ahead and fill out the demographic information completely, where it's got here, complete the student sections, the name, birthday, the grade that the child is on the IEP, the race, disability, school, age, district, age range, and the meeting purpose. So make sure that you mark those. Those are there for a reason. So make sure that it's all written in. Okay, so then we actually start with the document itself. The document itself, the first page of it, it's wanting us to have the access records. So what that could be anywhere. You could have a log printed off, you could have it on the student due process folder, or you could actually have the one from Infinite Campus printed off and placed in the due process folder. However, it doesn't matter however you do it, just as long as we have that record of access. And for those that need to complete it, we have to make sure that the name is put on there. We have to have the date when we got in there. And then we also have to have the purpose for which the party is authorized to use the records. So if you look there in that little asterisk, it says individuals included in the district's list of employees with legitimate educational interest under FERPA are not required to sign the record of access. So some of us that are special ed teachers in the districts, if you are doing that, each other's records or whatever, you know, it's saying that if there's a list of employees that have legitimate interest. All right, so under FERPA, you're not required to sign that record of access. Some of you do. I don't think it really matters if you do. I know I've seen it on there. And that's no problem. I would rather it be there as not be there if it needs to be there. All right, then you're going to go to item 4, which is looking at your notice. So if you don't have a notice in front of you, I know all of you all have got it, like I know this by heart, all these little pieces on there. So just visualize that, and then let's look for the timelines. So when you're looking for your local education agency, which is you, it's a school district, they have to provide a written notice to the parents at least 7 calendar days before the ARC meeting. So this is how we do. We look at the date that you sent the notice out, and we look at the date that you've got scheduled there for your meeting. And it has to be within, it has to be 7 calendar days or more. Now, if a parent agrees that they want to meet earlier, then, you know, you check that box. So, but anyway, you still have to have those 7 calendar days, no matter what. Make sure you have the 7 calendar days in there. So this applies to the initial ARC meetings for preschool when they're transitioning from first steps, and then the parents that are divorced and both parents have educational rights, so both parents need to receive that notice. And then a student lives with a family member and the parents have educational rights, both parents must receive that notice, even though a parent may have given a family member, you know, a notarized written permission to be the student representative. And for those of you all that were here yesterday and listened to Teresa, you all have the definition of parent and how that goes about. But anyway, we need to make sure that we have the proper people at the table, and that we invite the parents, even though, like she said, if they're in jail or whatever, we still have to invite them, and they can still attend, you know, while they're in jail, so, or whatever, wherever they are. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Brenda, if I could interject right here, when you're looking at the document itself, and you know, you're working with the 7 days, you're looking, did the meeting occur? Did the parents sign it? And you're looking for if there was a 7-day gap, like you said, and so that would be a yes if there is a 7-day gap. If there's not a 7-day gap and you didn't check the box that the parent agreed to meet earlier, if it's less than 7 days, then that would be a no. And then there's a couple of instances where it would be an NA, where the parent requested or agreed to meet earlier, like you said. So you would mark the box as an NA, or if the meeting was for a violation of student code of conduct and you were looking at a change of placement meeting, you're doing that quick 24-hour notice and that quick turnaround. So those are those items when you would stay away from marking yes or no, and you would put an NA in those boxes.
Okay. So I don't have to do this slide. Denny Paul just did it.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm sorry.
Time. So like I said, he just went over this NA to mark NA if the parents requested to agree to that at an earlier time. And then, of course, if the meeting is for a safety issue, change of placement due to a violation of the student code of conduct. All right, so when we're looking at district's attempts, depending on your district's policies and procedures, the district may arrange a mutually agreed upon time and location for the ARC meeting. Some of our districts in their policies say have 3 attempts, some of them have 2 attempts. So whatever your district policy says, that's what you need to go by. Now, if you're sending out a letter and you did not get it back, I would have tried to contact them by phone if they have a telephone. Some other method is what I'm looking at here, because if you're going to send out the same thing, you may never get it back. So that might be something you need to look at just to make sure that you've got those 2 or 3 attempts, whatever's in your district policies. So here it says mark no if the parent did not return the meeting notice with their intentions, the parents did not attend the meeting, there is no documentation of multiple attempts, and this includes more than one method of attempt. And that's what I was talking about a second ago. If it's a phone call, if it's a letter, if it's email, however you get a hold of your parents, that's the way that you want to go. Again, we're still on item 5. Depending on your district's policies and procedures, the district must arrange mutually agreed upon time and location for the ARC. So you're going to mark NA if the parents request or agreed to meet earlier. The meeting is for a disciplinary change of placement or a safety issue, and if the parent returned a copy of the notice stating their intentions for the attendance, or maybe state that they won't be in attendance. The next one is a pretty large one. It's item 6A through 14. What we do is we look at the purpose, and we have to make sure that we have a discussion of the post-secondary needs, post-secondary services, or both if the student is in 8th grade or age 14. Now, Denny Paul and I, we preached that, you probably want to start when they're 13 because they may turn 14 within that IEP frame. But that's left up to you, and because if you want to have 2 meetings, go right ahead, but I'd rather just have 1 meeting and get it over with in the school year, because it's hard to get parents in for 1 meeting, much less have 2 meetings. So student at age 14 or in 8th grade is invited to the meeting. You have to put that on there. You have to have the time, the date, and the location of the meeting specified. You have to have the role of each of the participants that's going to be attending the meeting. Remember, if you have a related service person that's going to be there and you're writing them in that role, make sure that you send them the invitation so they won't forget. And I'm guilty of that myself. When I was a teacher years ago, sometimes I would forget it, and when I had the meeting, I'd have to call them and say, "Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry. My fault. Can you attend by phone," or whatever, and they'll go ahead and do that. And then sometimes I would have to change the meeting because they couldn't be there. But anyway, make sure that you have invited and given an invitation to those that are all going to be participating. You have an option for the parents to note for alternate meeting time, date, and means of participation. I've seen a whole lot of that. I've seen that as I did record reviews last year. I noticed some of them did need to have it changed because they work or something. So we need to honor that. Notice that the parents may invite people with knowledge of special expertise of the child to the meeting. They can certainly do that. Now, if they invite an attorney, hopefully they will let you know so that you might have someone on board to help. If any kind of complications arise, I'd make sure I invited my director if that was to happen. If the parent requested, the district must send a meeting notice to the First Step service coordinator or other representatives of the PARTC system. Now, this says if the parent or the parent's request. Did you see that? I've sort of tried to capitalize that. So that's right. If the parent's request, the district can send a meeting notice to the First Step Service Coordinator or a representative. Then on item number 15, we're talking about your ARC membership. As Teresa said yesterday, you know, there are 3 main people that have to be there, which is your chairperson and your special ed teacher and your regular ed teacher. So those 3 must be there. And all 3 or all the attendees must sign that conference summary. Everybody there needs to sign that conference summary. For some odd reason, we might have a meeting and I don't know what happens. It could be that the teacher had to step away because they had a class or whatever. And we didn't get that signature on there. We need to make sure that we have that signature. And another thing to that is that, you know, everybody's supposed to be in that meeting, the whole entire meeting. If they have to leave, then, you know, we have to get that excusal letter. So, you know, we have to watch that. We just can't go in and out of a meeting. That's sort of rude to the parent and everybody else that's in the meeting. And I understand that teachers have to teach, regular ed teachers have to teach. So it's good if we could try to have the meeting maybe on their planning time or after school or however. But the issue that we find, the parent might not be able to attend. So we have to make sure that we do everything in our possible way to get that parent there, because we need to have parent involvement. So if the parent is in attendance, you know, face-to-face, telephone, virtual, however, we're going to mark yes if the parent's in attendance, and be sure to get that parent signature if they are in person. Now, if they're participating by phone, you know, you just want to check that box that they participated by alternate means. And you don't have to get the signature when that happens, because you've already marked that. But what we want to make sure we mark when we mark that box is that we write the date in that we're going to be sending that home. And then we have to put the method of how those documents are going to get to the parents. So, you know, you're either do it by mail. If you're having school and the students are there, you know, you could send it by the student. Anything there, just check however you did that. And of course, you know, as Teresa said yesterday, the word parent is used to refer to the parent as defined in the KARs. And of course, if your student is emancipated, then they can sign the document themselves. All right, so if your parents cannot be in attendance, you know, you have to check all these boxes, yes. You know, were they provided a written notice of the meeting? Now, this is what I found as doing record review document. I only found one notice, and that's all. That's it. It was just one notice. It was the letter form. You know, when that happens, that's telling me that, you know, did they get that notice? Did the child forget to give it to the parent? Did something happen to that? You know, so it pops up questions in my mind. Did they actually get the notice? Were they provided notification of the meeting through multiple means? We don't know that if we just had that one. So, you know, and all these have to be marked yes. Parents were offered alternative meeting time and location. That's on the notice. But if you don't know if they got the notice or not, how can you say yes? So, you know, you've got these things that, you know, pops in your head, and it's like, well, did they get the notice or not? If they didn't get the notice, I can't answer all these questions. Parents were given the opportunity for alternative means of participation. Again, that's right on the notice, but did the parent really get the notice? Parents were sent a copy of the IEP and conference summary. That means you have to have the date that you sent that to them and the method that it was sent to them. So now you mark yes if all of the above are yeses, and you would mark no if one of them is a no. So if you only have one written notification in there and there's no other form of or method of a notification, then I have to mark that no, because number one, remember, we have to have more than one. Some districts say 2, some say 3. So when you're looking at items 16 through 21, you have to mark yes if they attended, and you have to mark no if they were not in attendance. So for an SLP, if related services is not needed, you're going to mark NA. If the student is a speech-only student, the SLP plays a role as a special education teacher. All right, so then you have, of course, your regular ed teacher, your special ed teacher, chairperson, a person who can interpret the evaluation results if you're interpreting results, and of course, again, the related service personnel. And if the student is in the 8th grade or 14 and older, you're going to invite that student. Now, if the student does not want to be there, we have that situation sometimes. When that comes up, what I normally did as a teacher, I would talk with them about their ILP. I would talk to them about their interests, their preferences, their hobbies, you know, those types of things. And I would document that in the conference summary. So if you find that, then you can mark that a yes, you know, so somehow, some way, we have to make sure that we have that piece about the student and, you know, what's their future plans look like for them. What would they like their future to look like? Now, when a member is dismissed from the meeting, we're hoping that this is going to happen prior, we'll know that prior to the meeting. So, and sometimes things come up and we'll talk about that too. But when you're looking at item number 22, it says in the event a member of the ARC is dismissed from attending the meeting, in whole or in part, the parent and the school district agree to the dismissal in writing prior to the meeting. It has to happen prior to the meeting. And there's a reason for that. If the document was not agreed upon prior to the meeting, no will be marked. If the document was agreed upon prior to the meeting, yes will be marked. If no person was dismissed, you're going to mark the box in A. So when we're looking at item number 23, it goes along with item 22. In the event a member of the ARC is dismissed, the member must submit input into the development of the IEP in writing to the parent and the ARC if the member's area of curriculum or related services is to be modified or discussed in the meeting. Input must be submitted prior to the meeting. So the reason why they have to have this prior to the meeting is that the parents need to know what type of service, the goals, is that what they would like their child to see, complete. So they want to go over those goals. They want to see if that's appropriate for them, or if they want to add something else, or if they want to take away. You know, that's their input. Doesn't mean we have to do those things, but, you know, they have input to the IEP. So we're going to mark yes if the document was submitted prior to the meeting. We're going to mark no if it wasn't submitted during or after the meeting, or if it was submitted after or during the meeting. And we're going to mark NA if it's appropriate. Now, some things come up. We have this meeting day, and the special education teacher has a child, and the child got sick, and she had to leave. Remember, hopefully you have more than one special education teacher in the building. You could use another special education teacher to step in that situation. Now, if one of your related service people cannot be there, first see if they can participate by phone. If they can participate by phone, then that will be great. If they cannot be there by phone or in person, and this is if something come up that day, we first need to ask the parents, is it going to be okay if I go over the goals and objectives for this related service personnel that cannot attend? And if the parent says go ahead, if they're already there, they don't want to come back. So they will probably agree to that. All that has to be in the conference summary, and we don't want to see a whole lot of that, because if we do, then KDE is going to say, this is a red flag. Or are they doing this and they're just not coming intentionally? So, you know, we need to make sure that we're doing what's right for the child. So mark yes if the documentation was submitted prior to the meeting, mark no if the documentation is missing or submitted during or after the meeting, and mark NA if it's not appropriate.
Brenda, if I could interject, going back to item number 17, if there are any preschool folk in here, IECE certified teachers may serve as a dual role and may serve as both the regular and special education teacher in that instance. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay, that's good. That's really good. Okay. All right, so we're down to item 24, a description of each evaluation procedure, test, record, or report used as a basis for proposed or refused action, including, all right, so if you're looking at your conference summary, the very first page, you got the check boxes that we have to check that we're going to use because of the purpose of the meeting. So we have to have boxes are checked for each evaluation, procedure, test, record, or report for the district used on the basis of proposed or refused action on the first page of the conference summary. We also must have that two-page description of assessment instruments and procedures that spits out at the end of the conference summary. Please don't throw them in the garbage. Keep them and staple them together with your conference summary because it is part of the conference summary. Just make sure that you have those two pieces, because we mark yes if the boxes are marked on the first page of the conference summary and that two-page document is there. And if one of those is missing, then we have to mark a no. So we don't like marking no's. We like to do yeses and NAs because if we mark no's, then that's something we're going to have to go back and fix. On item 25, a description of the action proposed or refused. We're looking at section E of that conference summary. You're going to mark yes if there is a description of the action proposed or refused is marked. You're going to mark no if there is not a description of the action proposed or refused. And item 26, all of these sort of flow together. 25, 26, and 27, 28, they all just sort of flow together. And you sort of get confused when you're looking at that. So on item 25, if you're looking at that form, you see that you've got check boxes over there for placement. Full-time, regular ed, part-time, and then of course, full-time special ed, and it goes on down. That's the part you're looking at for 25. When you're looking at 26, an explanation of why the LEA proposed or refused to take the action. This is the part that you're over there, you're saying, like maybe for an MMD child, that they may need a slower pace because of the cognitive disability, those types of things. That's what has to be in that part. So you mark yes if there's an explanation of why the LEA proposed or refused to take the action. And mark no if there's no explanation noted, or the explanation is not a reason for accepting or rejecting the placement. So we sent out a document a couple years ago. It's about 6 or 8 pages, and it had some samples on there. You can use those. I'm also thinking about Denny, Paul, and I getting together and sort of creating another one of those documents, because now some of those might be out the window. We need to put some new things in there to help you guys. So that'll be another thing that we'll be working on, and we'll send it out to the directors when we get that done. Item 27, a description of any other options and reasons those options were rejected. So we're going to mark NA if this does not pertain to the student. You're going to mark yes if there were other options discussed at the meeting and the discussion is in the conference summary. Those that were here yesterday with Teresa, remember what she said. If we're going to talk about something else that's other than that, it's other than the purpose, we have to address that, and we have to mark that in the conference summary. We have to address it. Mark no if there were other options, but no explanation was discussed in the conference summary. On item 28, a description of any other factors related to the LEA's proposal or refusal. And this item can be marked NA if it's not applicable. And you're going to mark yes if the box was marked. And you're going to mark no if the box wasn't marked. So what we're looking there at that is when you look at your conference summary, there's a little section in there of talking about other factors, and however you answered that, you know, and hopefully did check the box. The box has to be marked. If you didn't mark the box, then it's going to be a no.
Brenda, I was going to say too, a long time ago, you taught me that you have to put reasons in there why you're further restricting that environment. Yeah. You're moving down that LRE continuum of placement options, and there has to be reasons why we can't get it done in the regular classroom, and those reasons need to be specific to the child, not just always the same ones or made up or copied and pasted. So it's very, very, very important that when we're reviewing files, Brenda and I have reviewed a lot of files over the years together, and she taught me very early on that one of the key pieces is to make sure that we're saying that the student has to have special design instruction, they have to have it in a certain way, and there's some reasons why we have to restrict or further tighten that placement. So that's a key, and that's one that would be a point of emphasis in our region, and we see that a lot in terms of folks just saying, well, the ARC decided this was the correct placement. It has to go a step further and tell us why that's the case.
And that's true. Well, I looked down here just now and I see my name, and I've got two computers going, so I don't want you all to think when you look at Dion Bates there, that's me with the holler background, because I've got two computers going. One of them belongs to Dion. So yesterday we were in there, and Denny Paul had saw that I was on there twice with two people with one person with two names. So I went ahead on mine and I left that out so y'all wouldn't have to see double of me today. So for you all that are looking at that, and don't get confused. I'm Brenda Combs, but I'm showing up on her computer.
We were enjoying seeing two images of you there on that yesterday. That was good. I felt like maybe I Dream of Jeannie had entered the portal here.
Well, you had mentioned that, and then somebody else, they started texting me, and I'm like, oh. So today I made sure that didn't happen, because they thought we were boo-booing, I guess. So the next thing we go to is your parental safeguards. Folks, these things are very, 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 very important. We must have to give them at least annually. And then upon initial referral of the parent request for evaluation. And then, of course, if you have any type of change of placement or discipline, we have to give that again. Upon the request of a parent, upon receipt of the first state written complaint, upon receipt of the first filing of a due process hearing in a year. So these are vital, because we know that we have to give them at least once a year, but there's times that we still have to give them again. So just make sure if you have any kind of change of placement or discipline procedures or anything like that, state complaints, due process hearings, you're going to have to give that out again. So we just need to make sure that we do that. So we mark yes if the parents were given rights. And when you look at the conference summary, if the parents sign that conference summary, they are signing that they have received those rights. So, and you'll see in the little statement, it has a statement there. So when they're in attendance, we need to make sure that they sign that. Documentation is when parents signs conference summary, and it's written in the summary notes. Mark no if the parent were not given rights and it is not stated in the conference summary. So your conference summary plays as a backup. It's a summary of everything that goes on in that meeting. Okay, everything that goes on in that meeting. Now, of course, we don't want to put no sidebar information in there, talking about the weather, talking about their other kids, we don't need that kind of stuff in there. And when I'm talking about other kids, I'm talking about the parent, talking about their own children. Because we know, as special ed teachers, we are not allowed to talk about any of our kids to any other parent. So let's move on. Okay, so here's preschool transitioning from Part C, and you're looking at item number 30. on your record review document, and this is for preschoolers transitioning from first steps. District's representative participated in transition conference arranged by First Steps. Now, this ain't arranged by the school district. This is arranged by First Steps, but they invite us to come to that. So it says, note, this is First Steps transition meeting. I spelled meeting wrong. That must occur at least 3 months to the child's 3rd birthday. This is not a district meeting. It usually takes place in the child's home. Mark NA if preschool student is not First Steps. Mark yes if your school district had a representative at the meeting. And mark no if your school did not have a representative at the meeting. So you're going to have a signature sheet there in your conference summary. Whoever signs, that will be evidence of who attended or if someone did not attend. So we always need representative there to learn more about our little preschool kids. All right, when you're looking at the IFSP, and I put that up there, and I said, well, I better put what this stands for, because sometimes these acronyms, we've got so many. As you saw on Denny Paul's training on Monday, we have so many acronyms. So IFSP means Individualized Family Service Plan. And that's what we use for our little preschoolers. When you're looking at item number 31A, for preschoolers transitioning from Part C, the IFSP was considered in developing the IEP. So we're looking at that, the IFSP. We're going to see if there's any kind of information in there that we need to roll over into maybe the IEP that's coming into the school district now. So we mark NA if the child is not in First Steps. You're going to mark yes if the IFSP was discussed and considered in the conference summary. Mark no if there was no discussion of the IFSP. Sometimes as a director, I had to call to get this document to put in our folders. So we would have that as evidence, because that's the piece that our representative signed, and we need that as evidence. So I would have to get that and put that in the folder. Don't know how that goes now. This is back buku's many years ago. So just make sure that you have that document in there. Okay, children that are exiting Part C, you're looking at item 31B. For children exiting Part C, documentation shows the IEP was developed and implemented by the child's 3rd birthday. So what they're looking at for this item, you have to write down when what child birthday was, the IEP development ARC date, the referral date was made by First Steps, the date accepted by the school district, and if it's beyond the timelines, you have to indicate why. So, did the parent repeatedly fail or refuse to produce the student for evaluation? Student transferred from another district, parent and district agreed to extend that date, or other, so you have to look at, I see it in the drop-down box, and there's other reasons for that, so you can mark whatever. All right, mark NA if not a First Steps child. Mark yes if all the items were completed and the child's IEP was developed and implemented by the child's 3rd birthday. Now we're transferring over to your IEP, which is your individual education program. Item number 32, the ARC conducts a review of the IEP annually to determine whether the annual goals for the student are being achieved, and revises that IEP as appropriate. So what we're looking for here is we're looking for the latest 2 IEPs. We have to write down the start date and the end dates of both of those IEPs. And we have to look and see if they're out of timelines, because if they are, we have to mark a no. So, but you'll mark NA if the child just been receiving special ed less than 1 year, because you only have that 1 IEP. Mark yes if both the start and end dates are within the calendar year. And then again, mark no if the IEP is out of timeline. Now, there's nothing we can do about that when they're out of timelines. We're just hoping that we get back on track and your next year IEP will be on time. Present levels. This is an area that KDE is looking at harsh. They're finding, and Denny Paul and I sort of agree to this, it's vague and we need to have more meat and less potatoes. So on item number 33A through G, the students' present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, including how the disability affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum. And then, of course, for preschool, the participation in appropriate activities. So I've got a note here. It says, note, each area includes strengths, areas of concern, supported by data, and results of the initial and most recent progress monitoring data, results of any state or district-wide assessments or evaluation. The ARC must include baseline data in the present level section of the IEP, or the area is marked commensurate with peers or not an area of concern. So when we're looking at this, and Denny Paul explained this really well when he was doing his IEP training. That's the reason why I had to change this PowerPoint 100 times, but because I didn't want to put the IEP stuff in here because he had already went over it. But anyhow, those present levels, we need to have, we're comparing the student. We're not comparing the student with another student. We're comparing the student with itself. We're comparing where the student is at academically, and then we're looking at where we're going to have that child or try to have that child within a year. So we're looking at data. We have to have data in there. We have to have our standards. We have to look at those standards. What can the child do? What's the next skills the child's need to go to so we can write our goals? What kind of baseline data do we have on the child? We have to have all of this in there. KDE found that we're leaving out some strengths. We're leaving out baseline data, progress monitoring data. So we need to make sure that we have a little check sheet or something, and we make sure all those pieces are in that present levels. When you read that present levels, you ought to be able to see that child, where the child is at, what skill that child needs to be on, what kind of goal that we're going to write, all the way through that. So we'll mark yes if all the components are in each level, present level section, or it's marked commensurate with peers. Again, as Denny Paul said Monday, you can mark commensurate with peers and you can still have a statement in there if you want to. That means that you don't have to write a goal. Now, general intelligence is a different section. We just have to make sure on general intelligence that we're relating those areas of cognitive disability back to your academics. Like if you have a working memory or slow working memory or auditory processing issues, those types of things you can refer back and how it would affect academics, because if you have an MMD child, their cognitive disabilities are low, their working memory is low, which causes them not to be able to keep up in class. And I mean, there's all types of things that you can go with that. So we need to put that in there, and they stress that. Does that mean we have to write a goal for general intelligence? I don't think we can do that. No, we won't write a goal for general intelligence, but we do write a goal for your academic piece. So that is what the State Department is looking for when they're saying you don't have anything written for your general intelligence. It's not that you have to have a goal for that. You just have to relate it back to your academics. Do you have anything else to add to that, Denny Paul? I see you shaking your head.
Well, I'm just agreeing with it. What a great explanation. And I was just thinking to myself, it's always good to hear someone else go through this, because you always learn and you always pick up. And I appreciate that very much, Brenda. The one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit here was the fact that we're really looking hard at adverse effect statements, and we want to dig into the standards and find out what that similar grade performance is, or that similar performance is for that age of that student. So we're comparing where they are, and we're showing the adverse effect of the disability due to the fact that they're behind either in academics or functional performance. So, you know, though, just a great explanation on general intelligence. And we've kind of gone back and forth with that in our discussions and looked at that, but very key to tie that back to academics and how that impact of cognition is really possibly the root cause of the academic issues.
All right. Thank you, Denny Paul. All right, so transition needs, item number 34. This is for children, again, that's in the 8th grade or age 14 and older. And we really emphasize that you start this at age 13, just because that the child may turn 14 within that IEP frame, and we don't want to have an extra meeting on our hand. There must be a minimum of one area marked. And of course, those areas there are instruction related service, community experience, development of employment, and other post-secondary living, adult living objectives. And if appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and provisions of a functional vocational evaluation addressed. It has to be aligned with your child's ILP. Now, there's times that when we do records, we don't have access to that child's ILP, and it makes it very difficult for Denny Paul and I to go in there to make sure that the interest and the preferences of that child is what should be written in there, because we don't have that ILP to fall back on and to read it. So if you know we're going to be in there looking at records, if you would put the child's ILP in there so we can see that, that would be very beneficial. We know that it's not, you don't have to do that, but if you know we're coming, it would really help, because if KDE comes in, they're going to ask for that child's ILP as well so that they can see that. We just need to make sure that there's the pieces that are in there, the areas that need to be marked or appropriate for that particular child. So we're going to mark yes if the box is marked not needed at this time, or at least one of the areas is marked and discussed and aligns to the student's ILP. And you're going to mark no if the student is 14 or older and the transition component of the present levels is not addressed. And we find that sometimes, and it's rare, but we do find that, and it's only because the child turned 14 and that child had the IEP meeting when it was 13. So that's the reason why we stress do it at age 13.
I also want to interject here, Brenda, that we need for folks to be putting things in present level in the transition box. Anecdotally, we need to be identifying barriers. We need to be looking at assessments. And I know you're going to cover all that, but I just want to throw that in there right there, because a lot of times regionally, I would say this is an issue sometimes for us in that we're leaving those present levels kind of blank, and we don't need to do that.
You're right. You're definitely right. Okay, so the item number 35, it talks about your adverse effects statement. Sometimes, I know this is aggravating because it's hard to relate to how you want to write that statement. Sometimes that statement's not a statement. So we have to make sure that we're talking about how the child's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general curriculum. We want to know how, not just state that it affects a child, in math. You have to, why, what barriers are there? Talk about, like he said, talk about those barriers. We need to know about the barriers. So this could be noted within each of those areas of concern, or one summary statement for all areas, but all areas applicable must be addressed. I find it to be one area at a time. I think it's hard to write an adverse effects statement in one summary statement because it's just too complicated. And it's easier for us to read if you have reading. You've got the area, the adverse effect for reading, math, written express, all those things down the line. It's easier for us to read and to follow. So we're going to mark yes if all areas of concern have an adverse effect statement, either individual or summary, and mark no if an area of concern did not discuss the adverse effect. The next one is items 36A through F, and this is your considerations of special factors. We do have 6 of those, and they are listed there. Behavior, limited English proficiency, blind or visually impaired, communication needs, deaf or hard of hearing, assistive technology needs. So we're down through there, and we are addressing all of these, yes or no. And then if you have a yes in some of those, there's more areas that you have to complete. But what we find as a big issue is we're looking at behavior. If you have a child that has a behavior goal, has any type of those behavior issues, if you've got something addressed in your present levels about behavior in your social and emotional box, you're going to have to check that box yes. We find people are still marking that box no. If it impedes his or her learning or that of others. So make sure that you're not going through there just checking the boxes off. Make sure you're focusing on that independent individual student, and that's who we're addressing. And we have to mark a no on there if you don't have that addressed. If we see that in your IEP, then we have to mark it a no if you have no marked for the behavior section. So mark yes if all the areas are marked, and again, you mark no if any one of the areas are not marked. And then again, when you compare it to your present levels, we have to mark no if we feel like that should be marked a yes. On item 37, it talks about your statement of measurable goals. And what we're doing is we're relating those directly from the present levels. This is why that present levels is so important. Your goal is based on what you wrote in that present levels. And we've preached this years and years and years that, the IEP just sort of flows. And it does. It goes from the very first part of it, from the present levels, all the way to the end of that. So our present levels have to have a lot of beef in it. We have to understand where the child is and what we need to do with that child at this time, where we're going to go. So each measurable annual goal must have enough detail to allow for quantifiable measurement and may be accomplished by including these following components. So you have to have all of these components. As you hear, we say A through F. Of course, it's listed there: audience, behavior, circumstance, degree, evaluation, and frequency. We have to have those 6 components in there, or we're going to have to mark no. If you miss just one of those, we have to mark it a no. If all of those 6 components are there, we will mark it a yes.
Brenda, if I might just right here interject too, our colleague from up in Floyd County just mentioned in the chat that we don't want any copying and pasting. And we talked quite a bit about that in the IEP training, and kind of a repeat, but certainly that is something that we don't want copy and paste in the present level. We do not want, just from year to year to have the same things in our goals, the same
present levels. Mm-hmm.
Present levels, the quantifiable data that you talk about. We have to have measurable statements in our present levels in order for that to be a springboard to a measurable goal. And so, very well point taken, Susan Green from up in Floyd County just mentioned that in a chat, and I just wanted to throw that in there.
And that's good. And Teresa talked about that yesterday as well. So, for those that were there yesterday, they heard Teresa say that. I think she even went further on to say, if you do copy and paste, then you need to take out certain things, add certain things, or whatever. My take on that, and I think Denny Paul's as well, is just don't copy and paste.
Just don't do it. And exactly. And she made a very good point. And that goes back to the Andrew case. That's kind of pushing us to a different level in terms of being appropriate in our development of IEPs. But she also mentioned too that, and I think with the guidance document, and getting back to the guidance document a little bit, but those guiding questions really help us with those special factors. And if we have, it's our responsibility as educators, as special educators, to know that disability inside out before we go to that ARC meeting, and to understand where the student is working presently. And the data needs to be current, and it needs to be measurable.
True. Okay, so progress data collection and analysis, and I thought Denny Paul did a great job Monday going through this. He hit it right on the head. So when you're looking at item 38, it says you have to have evidence of progress data collection and analysis for each annual goal to show how the child progress toward meeting the annual goals was measured. And then I have a few notes there. It says each data point must include a date. Ongoing progress data must be kept in a separate location from a due process folder if the evidence of final analysis, which is that big cumulative graph or chart, checklist, whatever, and the written summary of the analysis are added to the student's due process record when the IEP is reviewed. So when we come in to do a record review, you need to put that data in there so we know that it's there. If it's not there, we have to mark it a no. So make sure that that's put in there, because many of you have it. We just have to have it in that folder at that time. Any supporting evidence not uploaded to IC must be available upon request of the reviewer during the consolidated monitoring process. So when KDE comes in there, you must have this progress monitor, progress data collection, and the analysis. You have to have that for them, and as well as for us when we come in and do a record review. So you're going to mark NA if this is an initial IEP and prior to the first data collection. So you're not off the hook. You still have to do it for that initial IEP, unless it's right toward the very end when you write the IEP and you don't have, if it's 6 weeks you're doing them, or 8 weeks or 9 weeks, or however you're doing that, however you're doing your progress monitoring. So it won't be required, but you're going to mark yes if there's evidence of the collection of the data and analysis when we're looking at the annual review. Mark no if the evidence of collection of data analysis is missing. So we have to have that. And it's important to you to have that, because this is how you're going to write the next level of goals, because this is your baseline data that you're going to have. You have to have that before you can write your goals for your next IEP. Specially designed instruction. This is on item 39. And, you have to have SDI addressed. SDI and SAS has to be addressed. That's two of the categories that they say must be addressed if you are going to be a special education student. So item 39, there must be a statement of SDI for each measurable annual goal. So we're going to mark yes if there is SDI is listed and matches the goal. Mark no if the SDI is not listed or does not match the goal. So there's times that we come in and we do record reviews and we're looking at your goal, and then we're looking down into the SDI, and the SDI has nothing to do with that goal. So make sure you're not just doing a drop-down box or doing something and clicking on there. Make sure that it addresses that goal. You can't have a reading goal and then you've got some math stuff that's in there for SDI. Just make sure that it matches. And it's very rare that we see that, but sometimes we do see that. And then sometimes we see that it's even forgotten to be anything listed in that area. So make sure that that is addressed, because it has to be there.
Brenda, I will interject too. We've really been trying to impress upon people how important it is to have some preloaded tools in our tool box in order to meet the needs that we can expect every year, which is, the reading difficulties, the off-task behavior, the outstanding behaviors that we know that are coming, the reading, the writing, the math, the cognition issues, the ability to retrieve information, follow steps, being organized, all those things. And so we really encourage you to develop your toolbox around special design instruction and using strategies that are from those high leverage practices that we've often alluded to. And then I wanted to go back just for a second on progress monitoring and tell everyone, if you were in the IEP training and you are in the Google Classroom, I attached a new set of directions for using the Excel spreadsheet in order to capture that data and have those graphs generated for you. So if you go back to that Google Classroom, I just added that a day or so ago to our documents. And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep, as we see things come up, Brenda and I are going to share that with you through that Google Classroom. So I talk too much, Brenda, so I'm going to hush and let you.
No, that's important information.
Thank you.
Brenda, before you guys go on, it is Wendy Wells and Amanda Whitaker that we still need for sign-in. We've got everybody else signed in, but I don't have their information. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, you two gals, did you all hear that? Make sure that you sign in.
And let me say too, we really appreciate our staff, all the staff here. We've done quite a few trainings over the last couple of months, actually, with summer academies and principal academies and things of that nature. But we've got it, takes all hands on deck when we do these things. And we really appreciate the folks supporting in chat and the technical support from Cheryl and all the good folks here that are having a hand in making this thing come across to you guys today.
It takes us all. Okay, so on item 40, we're looking at reporting progress monitoring. So we have a statement of when the parents are going to be regularly informed of progress toward the goals. And most of us go ahead and mark the box concurrent with report cards. They can either do that or they can mark the other box. But when you do that, you're going to have to put whatever that interval is. And if you put weekly in there, then that means you're mandated to send home a progress report weekly. All right, so whatever you mark there, you make sure that you do whatever you say, because that can come back to bite you if it goes into any kind of litigation, due process, because parents can say, well, on here it says I'm supposed to get it every week and I've not been getting it, but every time the report card comes out. And folks, I know that we're busy. And I mean, there are some kids that we probably do keep some data on and go ahead and give it to the parent just on certain parts of the child, and it may not have to do with all of the goals. But you can do that part, but I would recommend you do it concurrent with the report cards. It's so much easier, and it's easier to remember if you do that. You're going to mark no if neither one of those boxes is marked. Again, supplementary aids and services is another item that we must have in order to receive special ed services. This is on item number 41. Your SAS must be listed for the student in order to have access to the general curriculum. This cannot be left blank. It just cannot be left blank. You're going to mark yes if there is a list of items, and you're going to mark no if there is not a list of items. Now, folks, and Denny Paul's probably thinking this right now, please don't give us a whole page of supplementary aids and services, because we know that you cannot do that whole entire page of stuff within that school year. It's impossible. And the state will tell you that too. You just can't do a whole page of supplementary aids and services. So make sure it is done that. Go right ahead, Denny Paul.
Well, yesterday in listening to Teresa Combs, she mentioned that several times about it being a legal document that we're entering into, and it should be only what we think can be accomplished and what we're going to do for that child exactly in 1 year.
So remember that, folks. Now we're on item 42, and we're looking at the accommodations for state and classroom assessment. Considerations of individual accommodations for administration of state assessments, district assessments, and assessments in the classrooms is documented. You're going to mark yes if accommodations are marked and there is evidence in the student's needs, the accommodations in the present levels, or the boxes marked the student does not need accommodations, and that's mainly for your your speech students. Some districts require the accommodation determination form to be completed as well. So there has to be evidence of whatever accommodations you mark.
All right, Troy, did you go get in the shower?
Yep.
Okay. Gosh, that's pouring down. Now, I emptied that bucket. I bet you didn't
Okay.
empty the buckets, did you?
Somebody
Like I
needs
told
to
you so, did you?
yourself.
Huh? Did you
Somebody needs
forget? Just look at me. It's okay. I'm not mad. I'm just asking because I told you it's going to rain, didn't I? Let's see if these, I bet they're full. Look at it. It's coming a downpour.
Hey, Amanda, I think you may need to mute Amanda Whitaker.
Okay, so let's look at these accommodations. Now, everybody is having a hard time during this virtual session that we're going through. They're getting bent out of shape. They don't know what to put on there, those types of things. But the bottom line is you look at that IEP as if that child is sitting in that classroom. If they need a reader, if they need a scribe, if they need a calculator, whatever they need, they're going to need virtual as well. So you have to address that and morally address it when you're writing the conference summary, because you're going to be stating in that conference summary, are you using Google Classroom? Are you using FaceTime? Are you, what are you using? What is your virtual platform? You need to address that in that conference summary. So make sure that you address that. We do have the software on the Chromebooks that you can have a reader. Also, it will scribe for you. So those things are there. You have to address that. Those have to be addressed. Make sure that you do that. We don't want you to have any type of violations because the compensatory time, we want to make sure that these kids are getting what they need to. And in some districts, when we went into this COVID issue in March, some districts actually went way ahead, above and beyond, and they done such an excellent job that the parent, even some of the parents I've even talked with, they said, you know, I would rather do it. They call it NTI days. Of course, we don't do that now, but call it virtual learning. But because my child got more one-to-one than they did when they was at school. So, you know, that sort of makes a teacher feel good because you're doing that and you're trying to help the child. And then the parents feeling better that their child is getting more one-to-one while they're off. And I like that. But we just have to make sure that when they're doing these accommodations now for their classes, that you have documentation, that you helped them with those accommodations. What did you do? The date. You have to keep a log of this. So just make sure you're doing that as evidence in case it ever comes up for compensatory time. You will have that. So don't get excited and have a heart attack or a stroke or whatever. It is what it is. And if we just do that, then that's going to keep us from getting into trouble. All right, so you have an alternate assessment on 43A. The ARC determines annually if the student meets all criteria for eligibility for the alternate assessment using the Kentucky Alternate Assessment Participation Guidelines. The discussion is documented in the conference summary, and the decision is documented in the IEP. What we're finding, and Cheryl may chime in here, is we had districts that were audited with the alternate assessment, and they forgot to put the evidence in their conference summary. We just have to make sure that we put that there. We just need to mark yes if the student meets all the criteria in the participation guidelines, and it's documented in the conference summary. Mark no if the student met all the criteria in the participation guideline, and it was not documented in the conference summary. And you also mark no if a participation guideline was not completed. So, you know, alternate is sort of a little area of its own. And sometimes we don't discuss that as much as we do the others, but it is just as important. So we just need to make sure that those pieces are done.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brenda. And that's one of the things that last summer that had come out in the KDE folder review audits was that a lot of people did go ahead and fill out the form. They just failed to write in that conference summary. You know, they documented all the discussion, but when it come right down to saying, yes, this student will participate in alternate assessment, those folks, for whatever reason, they had documented so many other things, they kind of forgot that simple part. But just make sure that you document that data and that you document that discussion and that you finally do document that, yes, they are going to participate in the alternate assessment. Just make sure your students are also appropriate for alternate assessment and that that's a good fit for that student, because we certainly don't want students participating in alternate assessment when they could participate in the general assessment with accommodations. So think about that like a continuum. So the first option is just general assessment. The second option is general assessment with accommodations. And then of course that third option is alternate assessment. And really think about these students. Could they participate in the general assessment with accommodations? So just make sure that you are making good decisions for these students, because the decisions that we make early on will impact these students throughout their lives. So if you think about alternate assessment, and when we often make that determination or that decision, at least, of course it's made annually, but typically what I see out there is when students participate in alternate assessment, then they are typically on alternate assessment for the rest of their career, specifically when they get into a high school setting. But just make sure that you are making a good decision for our students, and that decision is, is a good choice for them, because it will impact that student into the next few years. But think about, and into their lifetime, but think about how early on we make that determination. And remember, it's an annual decision. So maybe you're looking at that at the second grade ARC, or maybe third or fourth or fifth. Just think about every year, do they need that? Or could we wait another year and think about this again? So since it's an annual determination, you can think about that on into the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh grade years, or any year for that matter. But really consider that general assessment with accommodations when you're making that determination.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm going to throw in too, and this is not a threat or whatever, but we do have students that are on the alternate assessment. We did some record review, and we did find some kids that are on the alternate assessment that we felt like didn't need to be on the alternate assessment. And I hate to say this, but it's mainly because of test scores. We're doing this student an injustice if we do that, because when they graduate, they can't get a job because they don't hold a high school diploma. So we need to watch what we're doing, and we don't need to be thinking about test scores. We need to be thinking about the student and their needs. And if they're able to work after high school, then they probably don't need to be on alternate assessment. So just think about those things. All right, so when you're looking at 43B, this is talking about the communication piece that has to be in the IEP. If the student meets requirements to participate in the alternate assessment aligned with the alternate academic achievement standards, students' current level of communication has been determined and verified by the ARC. Note, the student's current level of communication must be documented in the student's present levels of the IEP. We have to make sure that we have that communication piece. So we're going to mark yes if the participation guideline marked the boxes concerning the students' current levels of communication. The level of communication is documented in the present levels, and there is discussion in the conference summary stating all of this. So there's three pieces to this. We have to have all three pieces to mark yes. If any of those three are missing, then we're going to have to mark no. Sometimes we think that, well, we've marked it in the participation guidelines. We don't have to put it in the present levels, or we don't have to write it in the conference summary. Again, that conference summary is telling what happened in the whole entire meeting. So we need to make sure that that is listed in there, and it has to be in the present levels as well. On 43C, if the student meets requirements to participate in the AAAS, documentation in the IEP shows evidence of a communication plan. Now again, it says the student must have a communication plan, or the student's IEP must document communication is not an area of concern at this time. In parentheses, it says in which a communication plan would not be necessary. The communication plan may be documented in the present levels, special factors, the measurable annual goals, or supplementary aids and services in the IEP. So we're going to mark yes if the IEP shows evidence of a communication plan, not just marked on your participation form. Mark no if there is no evidence of a communication plan. So even though you mark it on that the guidelines, we still have to have the communication plan. We still have to see it. Okay, program modifications, and this is item 44. Sometimes we get confused about the program modifications, and we're putting in things for students. This is for your school personnel. So we're looking at school personnel. Yes, it's about students, about a student, but it's all about school personnel. So statement of program modification and supports for school personnel to be provided for the student, all right, to advance appropriately toward attaining the annual goals, be involved and progress in the general curriculum, participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, as Teresa was talking about yesterday, and be educated and participate with other students with or without disabilities. So we have a note here. If the ARC determines the student does not require program modifications or supports for school personnel, the not needed may need to be documented on the conference summary. So you just check that box. You're going to mark yes if not needed is marked, or there's something listed that you as a teacher may need in order to support that student. You're going to mark no in the box if the box not needed is not marked or nothing else is listed. Something has to be in there. So just make sure you mark the box if there's no program modifications needed. Now we're going on to the least restrictive environment, and this is item 45A, an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate with non-disabled students in regular education classes. So we're going to mark a yes if the LRE statement includes a statement or a list of classes that the student does not participate in regular education. You're going to mark no if there is no statement or list of classes that the student does not participate in regular education. What I find on this 45A is that we forget to list the content area. You're putting a statement in there, but you're not actually listing the content area. And it actually specifically says right on the IEP in parentheses, content area. So make sure that you're addressing the content area if you're writing a statement. Some are listing the classes that they're going to be in regular ed or in special ed, but the ones that are doing the statements are leaving out the content area. And I understand they think, well, we can look down into the box for services and it will show us that we're in math or reading or whatever. But we still have to have that written in that LRE statement, because there are those three areas that we must, it all has to be aligned and it has to match. And if it doesn't, then, you know, something is off somewhere. We've got to fix it. So mark yes if the LRE statement includes a statement or a list of classes that the student does not participate in regular ed. Mark no if there is no statement or list of classes that the student does not participate in regular ed.
Brenda, I was going to also interject here that this is an awesome place for folks to be referring to the guidance document. I think it's page 58 in the guidance document, where there's some really good examples about how to write those statements about least restrictive environment and how those statements should blend and match what you're putting in your services, and then also that leads to your placement decision.
We have students and we have districts that do not no longer have a resource room. They were all put in a co-teaching setting. Is that what we want for some of our MMD students that are struggling in the regular education setting because they can't keep up with that pace? They're falling behind. You know, that's illegal as it comes. But because of the budget, we don't have money to hire additional staff to help with this. Folks, we got to get on board, and we have to make sure that we are doing the best for the student. Again, if this was to go to court, money is not an option in the court system. If the child needs a resource room, then the child needs to be in a resource room. And administration needs to be aware of that. If it goes to court, you're going to lose. So, you know, compensatory time is going to be a big thing then, and it will cost you money doing the compensatory time, because remember, that's outside of the school time. So just remember that. So we're going to mark yes if section F on the conference summary is marked and a reason is listed. Make sure it's a reason, and it's just not a simple statement that, you know, the ARC determined the child cannot participate in this setting. That is not a reason, okay? That is not a reason. You know, you have to put reasons. Again, we will work on some more reasons that we've already sent out some and a couple of years ago. I have resent some of those last year, and a couple of new directors, I've sent that to them this year. So make sure that they're reasons and they're just not statements. Mark no if section F on the conference summary is not marked and or the statement is not a reason. Now we're looking at your special education services, in which the LRE and the conference summary are the placement, and the LRE in your IEP, and of course your special education services, they all must align. So they all have to say the same thing. So 46A through D, the special education services for each area are completed. You have to make sure you have your frequency, the time, your projected beginning and ending dates, as well as the location written in those boxes. So you mark yes if you have completed all 4 of those boxes. You're going to mark no if one or more is missing. A lot of times we see the anticipated location box missing. Most of the time we see the rest of that in there. We just have to make sure that the amount of time that you're putting in there is the amount of time that you're using for specially designed instruction. So if you have a co-teaching classroom and you have 4 students in there that are special ed that you are servicing at that time, and the class is 45 minutes long, you will not put 45 minutes on there. The reason why is you're not going to be able to be with each student that length of time. Most of the time you're looking at 10 to 15 minutes at the most. Depending on their disability, the cognitive disabilities, they'll probably require more time. So remember that part. And then if they're in the resource classroom, you can count the entire time. But when they're in co-teaching, you cannot do that. So just make sure that you apply the correct time for that.
Brenda, if I could, would you speak to location and how you want that to appear when you're documenting that? on the services page of the IEP.
All right, so for your location, where is that going to happen at? Is that going to happen in the co-teaching? Is that going to happen in a resource room? Is that going to happen on a bus? You know, where is that particular, where you're going to be at? You know, that's the piece.
And
now, we have areas, we have districts that are doing live streaming. That means they are there in the classroom. The teachers are. They're going to be live streaming this. And they're doing it from the classroom. This is my opinion only because it's still yet up in the air. All this stuff is. There's nothing set in stone. But what I would put in my IEP would be where that child is going to be during, as if that child was in school. Now, in that conference summary, you're going to talk about what you're going to be doing if you're on NTI or virtual learning, how you want to talk, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have to talk about that. You're going to have to state that you've put, it's going to be in co-teaching math or reading or resource or whatever. Then you're going to have to go back in your conference summary. You're going to have to say, you know, during your virtual learning time, we're going to be participating on this platform and state those things there for that student. And that way you'll have that covered. Because if we do go back face-to-face, then you're going to end up having to change your IEP. And you don't want to do that. So you're addressing it in their conference summary, you know, because you're going to be doing it virtual to start with. And then I know some of the districts are going to go back to school doing face-to-face. So, you know, you just have to justify what you're doing and make sure you do a good job at that.
And Brenda, that's a very good explanation on that. Just kind of keeping those IEPs and those locations kind of generic in terms of just like they always have been, but then also explaining what's going on actually in real time in that conference summary. And that will cut down on the number of meetings that you have to have, because you may have to have meetings. You know, this is one of the things that we've stressed is that sometimes you're going to have meetings to review and revise those IEP goals, because if the student's not making progress, or, you know, if a student has completed a goal, then we should certainly be coming back to the table. But, you know, you don't want to have to come back to the table just to change the location. And we've heard it said from the get-go, this was not a change of placement when students are receiving virtual instruction. It's a change of location. And so capturing that in the conference summary would be a great way to do that. And then beyond that, just in real time, in normal time, I've seen in your trainings before, Brenda, I think that you have said if they're in co-teaching to list the class in which you're going to be in for that period of time. Is that correct still?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
It has to match. You have to match that, the conference summary placement piece with the LRE statement that you have in your IEP, as well as your special education services and related services if you have related services. They have to all jive.
And may I add that if the State Department reviews your files in an audit situation, they will ding you over LRE not being succinct and not matching. And you don't ever want to put, you know, things that might happen. You want to be transparent and say exactly what is happening.
That's right. So when you're looking at related services, it's the same as your special ed services. It's just a related service. So we have to make sure that if the child is receiving speech, OT, PT, transportation, account, whatever, related services, it goes in this section right here, except if the child is a speech-only child. So 47A, we have to make sure that it's going to be your frequency. B is the amount of time. C is your beginning and ending dates. And D is your location. Now, this is only for students that are receiving related services. If they're not receiving related services, you won't even be doing this section. Okay, so if the student is speech only, their information will be written in the special education services. You're going to mark NA if the student does not have related services. You're going to mark yes if all of the items are addressed. You're going to mark no if there's only one item incorrect, you still have to mark no. So we have to make sure that all of it is addressed. Extended school year services. We are having issues trying to explain extended school year services and compensatory time. A lot of people are getting those confused. Just remember, your extended school year services is based on a goal or goals that the child cannot recoup within that 6 to 8 weeks timeline. And that would be extended schools. They would be eligible for the extended school year services. And you would only be teaching the goal or the goals that they did not recoup. That's it. It won't be any extra goals. It'll be only the goal or goals that that child cannot recoup. Compensatory time is a violation of FAPE. Okay, it's a violation of FAPE. They're two different things, so make sure that you understand that. So on item 48.
Brenda, if I can stop you right there for just 1 second. We have a question in the chat, and I'd like to hear you weigh in on this. The question from the person is, if parents are choosing to educate students at home even after schools reopen, and I'm going to assume, okay, in-person classes, do we then need to meet to address this?
Extended school year services?
No, going back to what we were talking about before on location of services and how you're documenting on your IEP. If parents are choosing to educate students at home even after schools reopen, so I'm assuming what they're saying is there's been a choice that's been afforded the student that they can remain in virtual.
They will stay there, and they're only address that when their IEP comes up, annual review comes up. Because they could change your mind back and forth. I mean, you don't want to do that. As Teresa said, we don't need to have 100 meetings. When the annual review comes up, we'll address it at that time.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We need to get that in there.
Yes.
Okay.
Pops up. Okay, so like I said, we're still on the extended school year services. We're going to mark NA if the student has an initial IEP, because we don't have any baseline data to document if they need ESY. You're going to mark yes if the student warrants ESY due to not recouping the information within those 6 to 8 weeks, and there is a statement addressing this. And you're going to mark no if progress data show the student is making progress on each goal, or the explanation or statement is missing. A lot of times they'll mark, yes or no, but they forget to put the statement in there. The statement has to be included before you can get a yes. So make sure that you do both pieces. You check the box and you put the explanation in there. So concerns of the parents. This is vitally important for KDE and for OSEP as well. They think, and I do too, that the parents need to have as much involvement in the child's education as possible. If you can get the parents on board and you all work together, the child's education is so much simpler. The process is so much simpler. So we need to make sure that we address those concerns of those parents, whatever the concern is. So if a parent has concern of Susie failing algebra, that needs to be addressed. If she's having problems with that area or whatever, that needs to be addressed. Number one, that shouldn't happen, to be honest about it, because if a child starts failing, it's in special ed. Once the teacher sees that the child is not making any progress, then an ARC meeting should be called, and we need to find out what the issue is and address it. And it could be that the child can't handle that co-teaching algebra class. The child may have to have, the child may have to have math in the resource room. So, you've got to look at those kinds of things for that particular child. So the ARC considers the concerns of the parent or the parents in the development of the IEP. So we're going to mark yes if there is a statement that tells us that the parent has concerns about whatever. Don't just put in there the parent is pleased with the progress. You can put that in there, but that's not really a concern, and it's not telling us anything about involving the parent. So we need to make sure that we find and pinpoint educational pieces that needs to go in there. Or it could be behavior, because we have to address behavior. And sometimes even, I know in a couple of them that I read before, if a child feels bullied, I've seen that written in there. Now, folks, when they do that, you better start putting on your cap and start doing some investigating, because when you start talking about that, that is a different issue in itself. You still have to address that, as Teresa said yesterday. If the parent has that concern, you can say, you know, we'll talk about that after this. You know, we're talking about the purpose and all this kind of stuff. But in that conference summary, you still have to state about that parent's concern, and you also have to put it in that box of parents' concerns. But then after the meeting's over with, then there's going to be some type of investigation to see what's going on there. The child may not be bullied, and the child could be bullied. But if the child is being bullied, something has to be going on there, and it has to be addressed. So, and I'll stop there. But anyway, we have to make sure that we do our part. You know, sometimes children don't come up to the teachers and tell things. They're more worried that the bullying will get worse. And I've had that happen in my family, so I know how that feels on a child, because they don't want to tell on the other child. They think that something else is going to happen, that they're going to get in trouble, blah, 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 you know, all that kind of stuff. And I won't tell you how I was going to remedy that with my granddaughter, but it would be nice. So you just have to address things and go from there. Let the school system handle it from there.
Brenda, I was also going to say, you know, coming out of the Indrid case, this was one of the points of emphasis for making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing to provide faith, and that is to include the parent in the process of the development of the IEP. And so that certainly is something. And lots of times when I review files, I look at the file and I'll say, ask the parent open-ended questions. What do you think the student needs to be working on? What do you concern, or how does your student best learn? What are some of the ways that you see them learning in the home environment? And you ask those questions and kind of get that open-ended, so that they will give you some feedback, and you capture that in the conference summary, and you capture that in the concerns of the parent on the IEP. And then, you know, I really like the way Teresa was talking about it yesterday. You know, the Raleigh case is good law, because, you know, we're still looking at whether or not that student is making progress toward passing those classes, and are they going to matriculate to the next grade level. So that's that. You know, I thought that was very key yesterday in understanding the overall that Raleigh still holds some water, and then Indrid just extended that to what is appropriate progress for the individual student, and that's why it needs to be individualized.
And that's right. I'm glad you interrupted that and put that in there. That is so important. It's really important that we involve parents. And asking those open-ended questions is a key to get them to open up, because sometimes we have parents that feel uncomfortable just talking to us. But if you start asking those open-ended questions, they start coming to and they start answering those things. So, and that's one way that you can get those parents to open up to you. So for transition services, it starts on item number 50. And again, this is for the students that are in the 8th grade or age 14 and older. The student has a multi-year course of study needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. So we got a note here. It says students must be age 14 or older or in the 8th grade to address this item. So if your student, if we come in there, if your student turns 14, after we do the record review and it's still 13, you know, the director cannot use that one as an indicator 13. But we still will check it and mark it because the child will turn 14 during that IEP frame. But we still have to, I just wanted to let you know that. So we're going to mark yes if the student has a multi-year course of study that is aligned to their ILP from the current year to the student's expected year of exiting high school. And the discussion of the multi-year course of study is in the conference summary minutes. So again, we're talking about putting all of this in that conference summary. And we're talking about, and it says the current year. A lot of us like to put those 4 years in there so we can look to see those classes that go with the post-secondary goal that they have once they're 18 or 16, not 18. So we just need to make sure that all of that jive and that they're getting those classes that they need to be successful once they get in to those post-secondary pieces. So we're going to mark yes if we do have that multi-year course of study. It can either be in the IEP or it can be attached to the IEP. It's easier to just do it in the IEP, and you won't have to do that separate. We have to make sure we don't put those words, electives, in there either, or leave blanks. We have to have the number of credits. If it's a 6-day, a 6-period class, we need to make sure we have 6 classes listed, for that year. So we have to make sure we have all of that. We're going to mark no if the student doesn't have that multi-year course of study. So just make sure that it's there. And we have to make sure that it also aligns with that ILP. So just make sure that the courses that are listed there goes along with whatever interests that child. So now we're going to switch over to your 16 and older children, post-secondary transition. And this is looking at items number 51A through I. And it says, note, if on the day of the review, the student's record, the student is 16 years old, the transition requirements must be met. So we have to have that in there. Again, if the IEP includes only one measurable annual goal, then that goal has to have the education training box checked as well as the employment box. Most of the time, you're going to find that with your speech-only students. If the IEP includes more than one measurable annual goal, education training must be addressed in one or more of the areas for your annual goal, and employment must be addressed in one or more of the areas. So what we're saying here is you can't check employment and education training in the same goal. The only way you can do that is you have one goal. So we're going to mark yes if you have education training goal and an employment goal, and if applicable, independent living goal. And we're going to mark no if there is not educational training goal and an employment goal, and if applicable, independent living goal. So we have to have, at least those two, and if appropriate, we have to have that independent living goal. On 51B, your transition services, this includes, the IEP includes transition services that are needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. Now, they have a drop-down box. You can choose from that, or you can create your own to make sure that it coincides with what the student wants to be, the things that we can do as educators and outside agencies. If we have outside agencies, what they can do for the student for their post-secondary goal. So the ARC must document specific transition services needed and the agency responsible for each service under the post-secondary goal. What we find here is they changed Infinite Campus last year, year before, I can't remember, it's been a while, but you now have to write the post-secondary goal, and then you have to go and do like you do your annual goals and click on post-secondary goal to even get into your transition services. So it may just be a training issue for some teachers to make sure that they get those transition services in there, because some of them were left blank. And I don't think it was intentional. I think that they just did not know to do that. So we're going to mark yes if the post-secondary goal has those transition services listed that match that student's post-secondary goal. And we're going to mark no if the post-secondary goal has no transition services listed. Now, one of those transition services must be that multi-year course of study. So we have to make sure that that is one of those that we have listed in that transition services section. All right, so we're looking now on 51C, and this is an invitation to an agency. So for transition services likely to be provided or paid for by another agency, then the agency is invited to send a representative to the meeting if that's appropriate. We're going to mark yes if on the ARC notice the agency was invited to the meeting or the box was checked not appropriate at this time. We're going to mark no if no boxes were marked on this ARC notice. Then when you're looking at 51D, it's just an extension of that notice. If an agency was invited to send a representative, you have to have prior written consent for outside agency invited. Has to be signed by the parent. So we have to make sure that you do this outside agency consent before you send home the notice, because the parent has to consent for this outside agency to be there. All right, so make sure that if you do have an outside agency, that they are, the parent has consented, or the student, if emancipated, has signed a document saying that it is okay. All right, so note, in the record review document, it states prior written consent must be updated with the student's signature when the student turns 18. However, we have received guidance last year stating we must get permission each year for inviting an agency. And then, of course, when the student turns 18, the student must sign for permission if emancipated. So I don't know if they forgot and left that verbiage in the record review document, because we were told, am I right, Denny Paul? We were told that we had to get that consent every year?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't dreaming it.
Yeah, and also if you are a participant in the IEP Google Classroom from the training on Monday, we've put a letter from OSEP in there. It's a letter to Gray. It's dated around 2008, if my memory serves me correct. And that letter states this very fact, that you have to get that permission each time you invite an outside agency. And then going back to 51C for just a second, if we check the box that it's not appropriate and the student is already 16, there probably should be a little blurb or a little discussion in your conference summary stating that you've discussed that, and maybe listing the reason that the ARC feels it's not appropriate to have that agency involved at this time. And it can be as simple as that agency will not typically attend ARC meetings for students that are that age. But I deal with, Brenda and I deal with audits on it for indicator 13, which is transition, all the time. And we really need to be vigilant and cross our I's and dot our T's, because our I's stay crossed most of the time from looking at this stuff. But certainly this is something that we want to pay attention to, because, and then also, you know, you want to think about making sure that you've got a plan in place for your teachers. If you're going to have to be getting this invitation often, you want to make sure that you're doing it ahead of sending out that notice. So make sure that you're doing that and you're getting that consent signed before you release any information to an outside agency that would violate FERPA.
That's right. Good job. Thank you. Okay. So what I really wanted to emphasize here, even though on the record review document, it states about that written consent, it doesn't say that we have to have that every year, but we did get that guidance. And they did tell us that we had to get that every year. So if you had got something from OVR and you've got that checked and all that kind of stuff, we still need the following year, we have to send out that again to OVR. And it can't be a blanket statement, so we're having to send each agency that you invite, we have to send them a separate notice and a separate consent to the parent. Can't be all on one consent. It has to be on separate consents. So we just have to make sure that we do that. I know that the guidance document doesn't say that. I mean, like, not the guidance, but the record review document doesn't say that. So we just have to make sure that we remember that. Again, we're going to talk about that multi-year course of study. It's vital for transition services. So on 51E, as a transition service, the student has a multi-year course of study needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. So we're going to mark a yes if we have that multi-year course of study that's aligned to that student's ILP from the current year to the exiting year. And when I'm talking about current, I'm talking about the year the student is in at the present time. Mark no if the student does not have a multi-year course of study aligned with the ILP from the current year to the exiting year, or has the word elective in the multi-year course of study. We can't have that. And I should add, if it has less than the number of credits to graduate. So we need to watch that. Just make sure all of that is filled in.
And I will say too, Brenda, capturing the robust back and forth conversation, and Susan can back me up on this because we've been up and down the mountain with it. Capturing that conversation between the teacher and the student, teacher and the parent, is so vital in terms of, we're almost playing the role of like an old college counselor here. And we're saying, are these courses, are we on track? Are we matriculating? Are we passing? Are we headed to that goal? And we have to have that discussion in our conference summary before we can give you credit for that.
And that's true. So like I said, everything that you do in your IEP meeting, you have to write that in that conference summary. So you're going to have to make sure all these pieces are in that conference summary. It's getting to that point because we do have legal issues that pop up every now and then. We think we may know the parent, and the parent, will work with us. But now sometimes when it comes to their child, you're going to do whatever you have to do what you think is right as a parent. Okay, so there's a multi-year course of study. All right, so now we go to the annual goal related to that transition service needs. So you're looking at your annual goals in 51F, and included in the IEP are related to the transition service needs. So what we're looking here is we're going to mark yes if the annual goal or the goals relate to transition service section on the IEP, and we're going to mark no if we don't have relation to the transition services section on the IEP, or if no transition services are listed. So we have to remember that. And when I say that, I'm going to go down to the next slide because it's going to give us some examples of those services. So here's what I'm telling you, that you have to have that drop-down box. And sometimes we forget when we write the post-secondary goal, we forget to click on the post-secondary goal and write our transition services. So here are just a few examples of transition services. And as you see, all of it is agencies responsible as a high school, but you look and you find vocational rehabilitation on one of those agencies. Now, normally they will not come in. They'll come in as a group and talk to a whole group at one time. But they normally won't come in until their senior year, just to make sure, or to determine if they're eligible for OVR services. So, and we need to document that in our conference summary as well. If we can say that they are invited, however, they had their separate meeting with their student, and it's not during the IEP time. So we just need to make sure we document that and put that in there, because they won't be at an IEP meeting except maybe their senior year. And I think we have one district that has someone that actually comes or makes an attempt to come to every one of those IEP meetings their senior year if for OVR. Measurable post-secondary goals are based on age-appropriate transition assessments. So when you're looking at 51G, and again, the word assessment throws people off. When we're looking at this, this is the part we're looking at student interviews, or we're looking at the ILP. We may be looking at parent interviews. We may be doing student surveys, whatever. And I mean, there's several of them listed in that box on the IEP. But, you know, we need to be doing something every year. If you skip a year, the child may decide they want to be doing something else, and we'll be off track. So if we do something every year, then we will be keeping up with that child's ILP, and we will understand better what the child wants to do and place the child in the correct courses, those types of things. So we just need to make sure on our part that we're doing something every year to get more baseline data. And you talk about this in your present level statement under transition, you know, based on our transition assessments, so-and-so wants to do this, you know, and put that verbiage in that piece for your present level statement under transition.
Brenda, I'm glad you said that because districts are getting cited for not updating the post-secondary goal annually. And that is not just having the annual review meeting, but it's also having some fresh current data in your present levels for transition. So, you know, to inform that goal, to make sure that that goal is on track, it's still based on the student's preferences and interest. We need to be assessing students. And in the IP Google Classroom that we've created, there is a link to South Bend Community School Corporation that has a tremendous amount of those assessments, and they are categorized in regards to students that are matriculating to a diploma, and they're also ones that are on the non-diploma track. So it's a very good site, and I encourage you to visit that and make sure that we're doing these transition assessments from year to year, and we're updating our transition present level so that we can definitively say, yes, we are updating these annually.
Thank you. And yes, that's one way of showing that you are updating it. Good statement there, Diddy Paul. And please, what we're doing is we know that the teachers have a lot on their plate. So we're trying to come up with things that will help you. So get on there and look through that. And what you find in there, you know, use it. And that way you won't have to try to create your own stuff. It's, you know, it's already, don't reinvent the wheel if it's already doing it. Okay. Student attendance in the ARC meeting. So when you're looking at 51H, again, we're looking at the notice. Did we invite the student? We need to make sure that we check the student, check the box. A lot of issues came around several years ago, thinking they have to send a separate invitation to the student. No, you don't have to send a separate invitation. Just mark the role of the student in that box, and that will take care of that. You're going to mark yes if the student was invited on the ARC notice and was in attendance as evidence on the signature page of the conference summary, or the LEA ensured the student's preferences and interests were considered. So what you've done is, like Denny Paul was saying just a minute ago, like we are college counselors, we're sitting down, we're talking to the student about the ILP, all those things in that, and, you know, referring to the career choice, the career path he wants to, or she wants to take. We're doing that. We're going to be documenting that in the conference summary, stating that we discussed the ILP and the career path and all this kind of stuff in the conference summary prior to the ARC meeting, because the student did not want to attend the meeting. But still yet, you're going to invite the student, because we must have that on there. And if the student chooses not to come, we need to make sure that we're counseling that student, and we're writing that in the conference summary. We're going to mark no if the student was not invited on the ARC notice and was not in attendance, and the LEA did not discuss the student's preferences and interest. So we have to do that. Now, a couple years ago, KDE gave us a little leeway there and said, you know, if the child, if we forgot to check the box, the student box, but the student signed it, then we could go ahead and mark that a yes. But it's not written in this document. And I like everything in writing. That way, if something was to come up, you know, you had that in writing. But, you know, that was said, and we've been going by that, but it's not in writing. So just remember to invite the student at age 14 or maybe 13, if they're going to turn 14 in that IEP frame, 14 to the exit high school.
I think it's also important to remember here too, Brenda, that when the student doesn't attend, I know a lot of times they don't like to be pulled out of their classes or things of that nature, but that you have that discussion with them and include their preferences and interest in the discussion of the conference summary.
Yes, I thought I said that, but if I didn't, I'm glad you reiterated that. All right, so on 51I, we're looking at your measurable post-secondary goals. Are they updated annually? The measurable post-secondary goals are updated annually is what 51I is. You're going to mark yes if this IEP is the first IEP at age 16, because you don't have any post-secondary goals yet before they're 16. So if it's the first one, you're going to mark yes. You're going to mark yes if review of previous IEPs include post-secondary goals and the current IEP includes post-secondary goals. And then we'll mark no if the current IEP does not contain post-secondary goals. So we have to make sure that we get those post-secondary goals in there. We've got to counsel each of these kids. We've got to see what they want. We have to be their parent at school and guide them the best that we can, because we want to put out successful students. Age of majority is 51A. At least 1 year prior to the age of majority, which is 18, the IEP includes a statement that the student and parent have been informed of the student's rights and that the rights will be transferred to the student upon reaching that age of majority. So what we usually do is I tell them, and I think Denny Paul does too, at the age of 16, we need to tell them, and I'm going to explain why. Sometimes the child may turn 17 and we don't have a full year to have told the parent or the child. So when you do it at 16, you're for sure going to hit that mark and not, because some of them's missed it by 1 day. We had one district that the child missed it by 1 day, and we had to mark a no, and that was horrible. But you know, you have to do what's right. So if you do it at 16, you don't have to worry about that, because like it says, only you have 1 year. So it's 1 whole year. It's not 9 months. It's not 6 months. It's 1 year you have to tell them. So do that at 16 and that will solve that problem. So we'll mark NA if the student's not yet reached 17, and mark yes if the date the parents and the student were told was on or prior to the student's 17th birthday. So once you put that date in there, it'll populate every year. The same date that you told them will populate every year. So you don't have to write that in every year. It will self-populate. And you're going to mark no if the date the parent and student were told was after the student's 17th birthday. So just make sure you do it at age 16, and that'll solve the problem. Prior notice for student exiting high school. This is item 52B. And on the conference summary, it has documentation of prior notice of the student if graduating from high school with a regular high school diploma. So you're going to check the boxes that are appropriate, and that's the piece that goes with this. So you're going to mark NA if the student hasn't reached 16 yet, and you're going to mark yes for the box or boxes, because sometimes they may be 2 boxes marked in the conference summary concerning graduation. And then you're going to mark no if the box or the boxes are not marked concerning graduation. And like I said, this is on the conference summary, and it's talking about documenting for students as a prior notice for students graduating from high school with a regular diploma. It also in there talks about exiting school and those all that, the date you put in there. So it's got a variety of things in there that you have to look at. Students' academic achievement and functional performance, and years ago we used to call this a SOP. But anyway, item 53, for students graduating or aging out, documentation shows the student was provided a summary of the student's academic achievement and functional performance. And this includes recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting post-secondary goals. So we're going to mark NA for students that are not graduating or aging out. We're going to mark yes if the student is checked. There's a checkbox there that the student received the student's academic achievement and functional performance, and there is discussion of it in the conference summary. We're going to mark no if the box is not checked and or no discussion of it in the conference summary. This is a piece that the directors have to send in 10% of the graduating students to see if they did send out the student academic achievement and functional performance. So you have to address that. It's there. You just have to make sure you not only mark it, talk about it at the conference summary, but also give it to the student. When you have that meeting, you need to give it to the student. If you had your ARC earlier in the year, just make sure that you document that in the conference summary, that you're going to be giving that to the student when they exit school. Some districts do a real good job, and I have to talk about Donna Duff for a minute. She does an excellent job. She has a folder that she creates for her students that are leaving. Of course, she's not in high school now, but she was years ago. And she sent out their transcripts. She sent out a copy of the IEP, a copy of their current psychological, all those things she had ready for that student, as well as a copy of the summary of academic achievement and functional performance. So she had all that in there, and all she had to do was hand that to them. And I thought that was great. So, because she had a checklist that she did, and she made sure everything was in there, and she handed it to the student. So that is a really good idea. So I have to compliment her on that. So mark NA for students that are not graduating or aging out, and you're going to mark yes if the box is checked, and there is a discussion of it in the conference summary, and mark no if the box is not checked and or no discussion of it in the conference summary. If you'll notice, this conference summary is vital. We're going to have to make sure we have everything in there. Everything needs to be in there that you're talking about. On item 54, this is the evaluation timelines. For students initially referred during the current school year, the ARC completed the evaluation within the 60 school days from receipt of the parent's consent for evaluation. So, of course, we're going to mark NA if the child's not going to be evaluated, initially evaluated. So, again, I've got marked NA if the parent or parents of a student repeatedly, more than 2 times, fails to produce the student for the evaluation, or the student transfers to a school district after consent for initial evaluation is given, but before the evaluation is completed. Mark yes if the evaluation was completed within the 60 school day timeline or less from the date of the consent to evaluate. And you're going to mark no if the evaluation was not completed within those 60 school days. So you need to make sure you got a tracking sheet so you do not go over those 60 days because if it is, you're going to be out of timelines, and that's something that you can correct. Timeline for eligibility and writing your IEP, item number 55. So within the 60 school day period, the LEA shall ensure the ARC meeting to develop an IEP for a student is conducted within 30 days of the determination that the student is eligible. Now, we all do the eligibility and the writing of the IEP normally on the same day, because you don't want to have that extra meeting again. So that's what we usually do. We usually do that in one meeting, and that's perfectly fine. And I think it's best to have it that way. But you do know that you do have 30 days to write the IEP after a child's determined eligible. So we're going to mark NA if this section does not pertain to the student, and we'll mark yes if the IEP was written within those 30 school days after the student was determined eligible. We're going to mark no if the IEP was written after the 30 school days the student was determined eligible. So we have to make sure of that. Oh, item number 56, we're talking about the reevaluation timeline. And when you're looking at that, you're looking at the 3 years, all right? 3 years. You have 3 years to do the eligibility, the reevaluation. So the ARC conducted a reevaluation in the current year within 3 calendar years from the date of the last eligibility ARC meeting, okay? Not the testing day, the eligibility date, okay? The eligibility is where you're looking at. So here we'll be marking NA for students that's not applicable. We're going to mark yes for students that met the 3-year timeline, and we'll mark no for students that did not meet the 3-year timeline. And now, folks, there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. You have to have a tracking system, and you have to know when your students are up for re-eval. Even if you're going to do a triangulation of data stuff, existing data, you still must meet that 3-year timeline. Item number 57, the IEP is in effect at the beginning of the school year. So we're going to mark NA for a student that's not eligible at the beginning of the school year. They may have been tested and placed after the school year started, so it would be NA. Mark yes for a student that has an IEP in effect at the beginning of the school year. And of course, we're going to mark no for a student that did not have an IEP in effect at the beginning of the school year. And that happens sometimes because sometimes we have kids that their IEP will run out in May. And we forget that that child, we got out of school before the child's IEP was supposed to be written. We forgot to do the IEP again, and it lapsed. And when school started, we didn't have an IEP, so we had to have a meeting real quick to have it. But still yet, it's out of timelines. It's out of timelines. It has to be written. So make sure you've got that tracking device so that you can have an IEP meeting. If you see your school's going to be cut short, you need to have that IEP meeting. And I'm just going to state here that even though we had this COVID last year, we still should have had our annual reviews when they came up. We still could have sent the notices home to the parents. We could have called the parents, see if they can be in the meeting, see when they could be in the meeting, if they wanted to attend. If they didn't want to attend, they could tell you that. You could have the meeting. You could send all that stuff home, mail it home to them, and have everything done. If they needed to be reevaluated, you could have completed that consent to evaluate, reevaluate, mail it home with a self-addressed envelope for them to sign it and send it back. You know, there's multiple ways we can do things. Even though this COVID is here, we just can't get all bent out of shape. We still have to follow those federal guidelines because they're not going to give you no leeway. The federal will not give you no way. It's just straight up, just by the law. We mark NA for the student that's not eligible at the beginning of the school year. We're going to mark yes if the student had an IEP in place at the beginning, and then we'll mark no if that student did not. So we just need to make sure that we follow these timelines. On 58A, this is where we go into our initial evaluation. We're looking at all this documentation that we have to have before we do the initial evaluation. We must make sure that all these pieces are visible, that we can see these things. We just can't go by your word. So on 58A, documentation shows prior to or as part of the referral process, the student was provided appropriate relevant research-based instruction and intervention services. instruction and interventions delivered in the regular education setting, instruction and interventions delivered by qualified personnel. So we must have those. We have to have those. You mark NA if student was not an initial evaluation. You're going to mark yes if all three of those bullets are marked yes. And if one or more of those bullets are marked no, then you're going to mark no. So we just need to make sure all those pieces are there. And folks, make sure that we don't have this issue of the same dates for these interventions to happen, the same beginning and ending date. That triggers a red flag because we have to try certain things. If they don't work, we got to try something else, and we got to keep putting that in there, and those dates will change. So, you know, make sure that you're doing the student justice by doing those interventions and research-based instructions. Documentation on 58B, documentation shows prior to or as part of the referral process. You have database documentation for repeated assessments of achievement and behavior. You've collected and evaluated at reasonable intervals and at results of repeated assessments provided to the parents. Remember, we have to have a letter to those parents after each of those tiers. So make sure that you have those bullets and you have a copy of the letter in there. Just make a copy of it and put it in there. So you're going to mark NA if student was not an initial evaluation. You'll mark yes if all three of those bullets were marked yes, and if any of those bullets were marked no, then you have to mark a no. On 59, this is that consent to evaluate, reevaluate. The ARC identified a suspected disability and planned an appropriate evaluation as documented on the consent to evaluate or the reevaluation form. Review analysis of the referral information and information was sufficient to support a suspected disability, and assessment components necessary to assess the students were documented. So here again, you're going to mark NA if the student was not evaluated. You're going to mark yes if all three of those bullets were marked yes, and you're going to mark no if any of those bullets were marked no. So you have to have all three of those pieces in order to get a yes. Here with the full and individual evaluation, item number 60, of course, the ARC conducted a full and individual evaluation in all areas related to the suspected disability. Note, for a review of data for a re-eval, mark yes if the ARC documented a full review and analysis of the existing data. All right, so mark NA if the student wasn't evaluated. You're going to mark yes if the student had a full and individual evaluation in all areas of suspected disability. And you're going to mark no if the student did not have a full and individual evaluation in all areas. On 61, item 61, this is where we have a variety of assessment tools. The ARC used a variety of assessment tools and procedures to determine if the student has a disability and to determine an appropriate educational program. This is where we have to make sure we're looking at the whole child. We have to look at adaptive behavior for those kids that do have behavior issues. What type of behavior assessment did you do? You're looking at academics. You're having to test for academics. You're having to get social determination from the parent to see if they had any issues prior to that. There's just multiple pieces that we have to have in order to view that whole child and to be able to do what's best for that child and have the child evaluated. And then we know where to go from there once we get that report, what goals we need to put into our IEP. We're going to mark yes, social and development history. I don't know what I said just a second ago. It just hit me in the head. I think when Denny Paul did this, it hit me. Yeah, social and developmental history from the parent is what you need from that, for that as well. And then I know that sometimes never changes, except maybe the traumatic part, if a student had a traumatic event happen in their life. So you can have a meeting and you can go call the parent and just check to make sure all of those pieces are still the same in there, and that will suffice, because most of that won't change. So you mark NA, of course, if the student's not being evaluated. You're going to mark yes for a student that has a variety of assessment tools, or if the ARC documented a full review and analysis of existing data was utilized for the review of data. And you're going to mark no if the student did not have a variety of assessment tools. So as you see, there's a lot of pieces that you have to have for this particular component. Just make sure that we have those components before we assess. Because it's hard to go back after you had the testing completed, especially the adaptive behavior. Make sure someone that is knowledgeable on how to do that, because a child may fall into the MMD category, and because of that adaptive behavior score, it may knock the child out. So make sure that you have someone that understands how to do that prior to that. On number 62, assessments given in native language. Of course, we have to provide the child in their native language, whatever they speak at their house. So the ARC provided and administered the assessment in the native language or mode of communication appropriate for the student, or documentation exists that it was clearly not feasible. So you're going to mark yes if the assessments were administered in the student's native language or the mode of communication. We've got to remember that piece, or documentation exists that was not feasible. And then mark no if the assessment were not administered in the student's native language or mode of communication. As to date, I've been here several years. I've not seen that to be a problem. But as we get these students in that are non-English speaking, and they're coming, they're getting more and more now, we have to make sure that we give that in their native language, because we need to make sure that the playing field is level. Evaluations and information provided by the parents. This is item number 63. So the ARC considered evaluations and information provided by the parents. Yesterday, Teresa talked about this. They can bring in evaluations. They can bring in whatever they would like. And we can look at that as an ARC team. We can consider it, if we feel like it is important. But we may have more current data and have progress monitoring, those types of things. And it could override whatever they have. But just because they bring something in, doesn't mean we have to do it. But we do need to look at it, and we need to consider it, and it needs to be documented in the conference summary. So we're going to mark NA if there were no evaluations and or information provided by the parents. And we'll mark yes if there were evaluations and or information provided by the parents. And then, of course, no if there were no evaluations and or information provided by the parents, but the ARC did not consider it. So if they brought something in and we didn't consider it, we didn't write it in our conference summary that we reviewed it, blah, 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 then, that's going to be a no. Again, we have to make sure everything is documented in that conference summary. Some things they bring in are valuable to us. And then again, like I said, some things we may have more updated information, and we go by the more updated information. ARC discussion for the conference summary, item number 64. The ARC included a discussion of the current classroom-based local or state assessment, the classroom observation from teachers and related service providers, referral form, database documentation of repeated assessment, multidisciplinary evaluation report and classroom observations, social developmental history, adaptive behavior assessments, rating scales, and then, of course, I'll go to the next slide. When you're looking at this, you mark a yes if the conference summary notes have a discussion of the documents and discussed in that previous slide, and you're going to mark no if there was no discussion of those documents in that previous slide. So when we're talking about previous slide, we're talking about this one right here. I know right now there's issues about these classroom observations because they're not in the classroom, but talking with KDE and talking with Teresa, the behavior observations, you know, if you have something that is a year or less, so if you've got some anecdotal notes, if you do have an observation that you did prior to going off of COVID, then, you know, we can use those. But like Greta said, is a behavior observation going to knock a child out of receiving special education services? Probably not. So if you can't get a behavior observation, then you want to write that in that conference summary. And you can also write that you can do behavior observations after the fact. But, you know, a behavior observation will not knock a child out of receiving special education services. And that came from Greta. And Teresa is saying the same thing. So we just need to make sure that we have all the other pieces, but we still need to talk about, you know, we did not get these observations because the child was not in the classroom due to COVID. You know, and if you want to do those when the child comes back face to face, you can do that as well. But they also talked about the when the child comes in and to be tested by the school psychologist. That school psych does do a little observation of the child when they come in there, and you can use that one. So you've got that one in there that you can use for this at this time. So we just don't want to get bent out of shape because we don't have that. Just think, if you can't get it, you can't get it. So don't worry. On item 64, we're continuing that. All right, I just talked about that. Yes, if the conference summary notes have a discussion of the documents discussed, and then a no if you don't. All right, so item 65 is talking about evaluation before services. That's a no-no, but anyway, the ARC conducted a full and individual evaluation prior to implementing special education services. So if the child wasn't evaluated, of course, we're going to mark NA. And then we're going to mark yes if the child had an evaluation prior to receiving special education services. And then we're going to mark no if the student received special education services prior to having an evaluation. So we have to be careful there. And another thing, if a child is a speech-only student, that's not talking about this, okay? And they find that the child needs to be tested for some other disability. So that's not what this is talking about. The child it's going to be separate, okay? So this is just a different thing. All right, so when you're reviewing or using review of existing data, this is item 66A, the ARC determines additional data is not needed for a reevaluation, then the ARC documents the review of that existing data. And folks, you've got to be in there and you've got to put in, be specific, okay? We don't want one sentence in there. It has to be lengthy, all right? It has to have all kinds of stuff in there. Evaluations and information provided by the parents, if available. And you have to have a minimum of 2 classroom observations by ARC members. That's if you can get them. We'll do that. That's because of the virtual stuff. 1 or more of the following. So you have current classroom-based assessment data, and of course that's including progress monitoring data. You should have that. Local assessments and state assessments. Of course, we may not have the state assessments for current. You're going to mark NA for the student that did not have to be evaluated, and you're going to mark yes if you have those items for existing data, and you're going to mark no if there's no evidence of the above items used. So, you know, when we go in there and look at that existing data, if it's just like a 1-sentence thing, I mean, that's a no. You've got to be specific in there because this is based on determining if the child continues to need special education services. All right, so reevaluation not conducted. So on item 66B, you notify the parent, notifies parents of the reasons the ARC is not conducting a reevaluation and informs parents of their rights to request an assessment. A parent can request an assessment, okay? If you're not going to do one, the parents can still request it. All right, so you're going to mark NA if the child don't require a reeval. You're going to mark yes if the parents were notified and given reasons for not conducting a reevaluation and inform them of the rights to request an assessment. And then you're going to mark no if the parents were not notified and are given reasons for not conducting a reevaluation, and inform them of the rights to request an evaluation. Sometimes things slip by us. Sometimes a folder gets put in something and it may get mixed up, and we sort of get out of timelines and those types of things. We just need to make sure that we're organized. We have things in place. We have tracking systems to keep us out of trouble. So just make sure that you follow those guidelines. All right, so now we're up to questions or concerns. So if you have any kind of concerns or anything about the compliance record review document, or even about the IEP guidance document, go ahead and put that in the chat. And if you don't think of anything now, but you may think of something later on, I have mine and Denny Paul's email listed there. You can always send us an email and we'll get back with you. Text us, whatever is better for you, and we'll get back to you. Do we have any questions in the chat? You're muted, Denny Paul.
I'm sorry. The chat is clear.
Oh,
okay. I think we've answered
everything
as we've moved through, and you've done an excellent job doing that.
I know this is a boring topic. I know record review is just hard. It's compliant. It's not fun. But we have to have it, and we have to do it because we've got to make sure that our records are compliant so we don't get on corrective action plan. So that's one reason why, please make sure that if you have any questions, contact either one of us, and we will get back with you and explain whatever needs to be explained to you. If we don't have the answer, we'll find the answer. We'll contact KDE and get the answer.
Brenda, I will say too, we're going to have a recorded session of this, and you know, please share this with staff. Please share this with your new teachers. It's certainly the baseline for what we are looking for in terms of compliance and documentation that's needed to stay out of hot water. So we appreciate that, and any help you can give us in getting the word out that this information is so vital, especially to our special education teachers and ARC chairpersons.
Okay, if there's no more concerns, we'll stop here. And if you, like I said, if you have any questions, just get a hold of us. We appreciate you being here.
Yes, we really do appreciate you and your time today.